But joining me first is Dr. Alan Mendoza, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society, a national security think tank. Very good evening to you, Alan. Thank you for joining the programme. When Dame Sara Khan talks about this and the fact that her recommendations are sitting on a shelf gathering dust, and she thinks that there is a serious problem and she's baffled about this, does this surprise you?
Well, it doesn't surprise me that she thinks there's a problem, and it doesn't surprise me that she thinks her reports are gathering dust, because, frankly, it's not just her reports that are gathering dust. You may recall that before Sara Khan's report, any of her reports, there was the Casey review that looked into this issue, specifically into how we can foster better social cohesion. And since Dame Sara's time, of course, we've had the William Shawcross Prevent review, yes, which also looked into this quite extensively and said, look, these are the things you need to do. We've had the Manchester Arena inquiry report, again saying these are the things we have to do. And the commonality to this is that very little is being done at a time when, as you've rightly pointed out, there are red lights flashing across Europe and across the USA on this issue. So yes, we have a problem.
So can you just explain a little bit for the listeners, Alan, what the issue in your view actually is?
Well, the issue right now is that, well, there are many issues.
Yes.
So let's start in the general. In the general, it is certainly the case. We think that extremism across the board is on an upward trend base. Now, when I say across the board, I mean it is far right extremism, yep, it is far left extremism, and it is radical Muslim extremism, yep, in those terms. And those are, if you like, the three great reservoirs, yep, that you have. Mm-hmm. Now, of those two, the two that have historically been the most problematic have been the far right, of course, and radical Muslims, because they're the ones who end up mostly, not exclusive, but mostly in violent extremism. Yes. But even take a step back, you can see the non-violent extremism that you're seeing, say, on our streets at times, with some of these marches over the past few weeks. It tells you there's a problem going on. And what we're talking about in various of these reviews is, how do you tackle that? How do you go down the supply chain, if you like, of extremism and root it out from the first bit to the last, so that there are no terrorist attacks?
Now, just give us a little bit of a potted history, Alan, in terms of when the Prevent review was set up, because there was the 7/7 bombings back in 2005. Yes. This was then looked at by the government. There had to be a serious response to it. There were a number of different elements to the response, of which Prevent was meant to be one element, where they would be trying to go in and try and understand what was driving radicalization and extremist ideology, particularly Islamist ideology, and try and tackle it at its root source and deal with the problem at the base cause. Where have we got to with all of this?
Well, you're quite right to highlight that it's been a process, basically. And yes, all this starts essentially at 7/7, when suddenly people decided, several years, of course, after 9/11, despite warnings that there might be a problem here. So, and before that time, essentially, our policy was, well, as long as you don't attack us here, go forth and be extremist. But, after that point, the policies came in. Prevent, as you say, is a bottom end, but it's a bottom end that's sort of designed to obviously look at the earlier stages of the radicalization process. And so that's why you get people being referred to this program. And normally it's people in civil society, teachers, sometimes parents, others who observe people who are exhibiting extremist tendencies. And as you go through that process, you have them, of course, going into the Prevent program, and then some of them are referred upwards to a point where their more active intervention occurs. And the aim all the way along is to sort of pin down people, stop them from being extremists or turn them the other way, and prevent that from becoming a bigger problem. And where we are right now is, of course, we've had a big review at the start of this year, Ali, as you know, which looked at Prevent. It's not been the first Prevent review, there have been several, but here's the most recent one, where he said the focus is all wrong. The focus is all wrong. You're looking ideologically for far right-wing extremism, and ideologically you are deciding to ignore radical Muslim extremism. And so his report says we've got to work on that. If you look again at Sara Khan's report, yep, she's saying there's a problem in this area as well.
Now, obviously, there has been an increase in right-wing extremism. Is it the point, though, that Shawcross was making, is that it's all very fine to focus on right-wing extremism, and you should, but there has been focusing on that has led to a neglect of the elephant in the room, which is there has been also a rise in Islamist extremist tendencies as well.
Yes, I mean, his point is certainly not ignore far right-wing extremism.
No,
It certainly
he's
isn't.
getting the balance.
It's a problem, and the balance, and for this we have to understand the conveyor belt, if you like, from first hints of extremism all the way to planning a terrorist attack. If you go to the other end of the scale, Ali, you will know as well as I that it's approximately 90% of people who are on the MI5 active watch list, if you like. It's about 43,000 individuals, and 90% of those are from the radical Muslim side of the debate. And Shawcross, his contention was, it seems very strange that at this end we have this big problem here, but the number of referrals has fallen for the radical Muslim side, even though it's increased for the far right. Are we really getting the balance right? And he concluded something had gone badly wrong, and it had gone wrong on an ideological basis, i.e. it's really easy for us to all unite against far right extremism, but when it comes to radical Islamist ideology, it's much harder to get everyone on board to say there's a real problem.
Now, you talk about the conveyor belt, and which I think is a really interesting analogy, because in the past there has been a lot of talk about trying to clamp down on radical groups, including Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is quoted, and others. But those threats to prescribe these groups have never come to pass.
Well, obviously, some groups have been prescribed over time.
Al-Muhajirin, for example.
Yes, exactly, and our good friends there as such. But you're right, Hizb ut-Tahrir never kind of made it to the prescribed status in the UK, although it is prescribed, of course, in other countries. And so it's interesting that we never got there. Tony Blair started that approach, actually. He was the one who first thought, let's try and get it. He was dissuaded. Various Conservatives had the same problem. And then, to be fair, it did look like Hizb ut-Tahrir had become a minority interest, not much going on. But I think what's happened in the last few months has been that it's had a resurgence, quite clearly, and that's what's brought it back to the table. I think the difference now, Ali, is that we're far down the road of hate legislation to where we were 15, 20 years ago, and there could be a very easy way to prescribe them based on changes to how we define hate speech.
Now, just let me ask you for your thoughts on the article today by Robert Jenrick, the former immigration minister, in the Telegraph. I mean, he was saying that basically he's talking about an unholy alliance between Islamists who barely bother to disguise their anti-Semitism, these are his words, and the far left has cemented itself in weekly mass marches in the capital where the glorification of terror and flagrant anti-Semitism abounds. Is he right there?
Well, I think he's certainly right to highlight what we term the Red-Green Alliance here. This is a well-known and rather strange phenomenon, because if you think about it, the hard left and radical Muslims should have nothing to do with each other.
That's very true.
In the sense that they, if you look at, for example, sexual minority rights, they're going to be a big area of division there.
Absolutely.
But it does seem, unfortunately, that when you get to the extremes, there are certain things that unite the extremes, and you can see that with the far right as well. And one of those things is anti-Semitism, quite clearly. And it's very obvious, and it has been obvious for the past few months, that in the marches, there is an element in those marches of people who are rabid anti-Semites, who are happy to express that publicly, and that goes across from the hard left to radical Muslims, and there's a big problem in this regard, and I think he's right to highlight that point.
Now, finally, what should we be doing that we're not doing now to try and tackle the issue? Obviously, Prevent has been much criticised, particularly by the Muslim elements of the Muslim community, saying that it singles them out, and various other criticisms have been made. I mean, what should we be doing to try and tackle the issues that we face in our country?
Well, the most obvious way of handling this is we don't need a massive literature review. We don't need a new report. We don't need, months of investigation. We have multiple reports that have sat there, that have been researched, that have had, kind of the imprimatur of government on them, that are just gathering dust. So we come back essentially back to the starting point of this discussion. Zahra Khan is right. The easiest way to handle this is implement the recommendations that Louise Casey, that William Shawcross have put in, and you will start to make a dent in that problem. But do nothing, and I can assure you extremism is going to grow and grow in this country.